Today on the Stay Visionary podcast, we're joined by Marc McQuain, co-founder and CEO of Volstrukt, a company reshaping how homes, ADUs, tiny homes, and small structures are built through lightweight steel framing systems. Welcome, Marc.
Hi, Ed. Thank you.
Hey, Marc, so can you start by sharing a little about your background and what originally led you into real estate, retail property, and eventually the housing innovation you're currently doing?
Sure. I guess it wasn't a plan. Like most people, I sort of ended up here. I I studied construction, didn't like school very much, got out of that, went in the military for a few years, figured I better go back to school, did that. When I got out of school, it took me about 9 years. I worked my way through GI Bill and all that. I ended up sort of on the edge of retail a little bit. So I was doing this thing called tenant coordination out in California. Was fortunate to work on some really, really nice properties just with where I went to Cal Poly. So where I ended up in Southern California was a nice place to start. And that took me to London to work on a Blue Water, which was was a renowned shopping center at the time, opened very successfully, which is what my team did. And that turned into a gig in outside of Madrid for a couple of years, doing development manager for shopping centers. Ended up coming back from that, worked on Santana Row out in San Jose. And then that's when I started. I left the corporate world and started Vindico Retail. And we were a retail delivery tenant coordination business. That was 20 couple years ago. We did that. We're primarily in the Middle East now. We've been over there for about 17 years. And that's sort of where I'd always liked residential. I did my residential internship in Newport Beach, and I've always been drawn to it. But like in that, my experience then was pretty much with the rich and famous, beautiful houses, cliffside stuff. And when I was in Dubai for the recession, we'd been there a few years. Everything was going fantastic. We thought we were brilliant for being there when everything was falling apart back here around in 08, 09. All the projects over there sort of disappeared. We had one that kept us going, and that project, I had a big office with nobody in it because it was pretty, it wasn't a lot of fun. But we created a modular retail space out of steel. Off the back of a project in Abu Dhabi, I'd gotten to know this roll forming system out of New Zealand, and that sort of turned into this new business called Pop Retail that we developed a pocket shop that we could put that in overnight, take it out in about 4 hours. We did that for a few years. The Vindico started to come back. I had the opportunity to come back to the U.S. I've been over there about 8 years at that point. My kids that were a couple years old when I went there were kind of starting to ask questions. So we came back to the U.S. And that's when I got into small houses. We did a lot of tiny houses, and that's led us to doing a lot of residential work now.
Oh,
and that's sort of where Volstrukt came up out of that. So yeah, it's kind of interesting how you don't know what the journey is going to be, but we're happy with where we've ended up. We didn't think we were going to we bought a machine in the US. We were one of the first ones to have a machine here. And it was, we were going to do retail because that's my background. Those are the doors that I can knock on and move forward with. So we thought we were going to do a lot of that. We ended up getting a lot of calls about tiny houses, which I'd never heard of because I've been out of the country for, I think, 8 years at that point.
Yeah.
We looked at that. We said, we'll do a couple. And that was interesting. We did all the TV shows, although no one, we were doing the structure, and nobody really wants to see the structure. They want to see the pretty house at the end in the story. But we did that. We've done, over on the retail side of the business, we've done over 12,000 stores, stores and restaurants that we've opened over the last 20 years. On the small house and kit home with the steel structure, we've done over 1,000. So we've stayed busy, and we certainly, when we started to do the tiny houses, it was what we liked about that. It was going to make people think about how much space they needed. Do we really need, 2,500, 3,000 square foot houses? Because now we're building the biggest houses that we've ever built for the smallest households that we've ever had. And and we've all seen, I graduated in 82 when it was about 3 times your income to buy the average house. Now it's 5 and up to, like where I'm at here in Austin, it's about 7.5 times the median income to purchase a home. So it's made it really hard for young people to get on the property ladder. And having lived around the world, spending a lot of my career outside of the U.S., it's one of the things that that we don't do nearly as well as other places at helping people get on the property ladder and start to make those decisions. So
The opportunity, where did you see in the market that led you to the creation of Volstrukt?
well, I think it's the coming from my construction design background. There's a lot. I don't know if you're drawn to those the documentaries or watching factory shows on TV where you're going, oh, that's really cool watching. That was I walked into the to kind of a crappy little warehouse out in the back end of Sharjah and outside of Dubai, and saw this machine and was like, well, that's amazing, because I've been building stuff for a long time. And when I didn't even realize at the time. At the time, I looked at that machine and went, that's great. I saw the Moran. It would take, you put a coil of steel on the back and it would turn that into a bunch of pieces that got assembled in, literally minutes. And for the things that we were doing in these retail centers, it was really amazing how quick it was and how precise it was. Now, I've learned a lot more. We've been using those machines now for, I guess, probably almost 20 years. So between 15 and 20 now. So
Okay.
I didn't even realize sort of the benefits. But when I got back here, particularly when I worked my way through school as a carpenter, as a cabinet maker. So seeing, and it's just one of those things that over time you see little glimpses of things as you go through life. And a lot of people hate IKEA. I love IKEA because I was, as a making furniture to put myself through college, I knew how much experience I needed, the tools I needed, the time, the space to actually turn a pile of wood into something that was a piece of furniture. And, if you said how many cabinet makers are in the room, not a lot of people put their hands up. But when you say how many people put together an IKEA cabinet, most of the hands go up. And to me, that's what technology is supposed to do. It's supposed to kind of make complicated things more accessible, whether that's, TurboTax and, whatever it is, all these things. So when I saw the machine and I went, okay, well, we've got a real labor issue in and around, housing in the U.S. And, that's been one of the big, particularly post, the Great Recession, that's really made it hard for housing to come back. And so I've always gone, well, this is going, to really help that, if not fix it. And knowing I was a pretty good carpenter, but you could put the best carpenters in a room and they can't do what that machine can do, and they can't do it as quickly. And,
Yeah.
a lot of the problems we have with housing, once you get through that, very difficult process, is with it's still being, even if you're building the same house 100 times, it's all, custom built. We're still building it in the field for the first time. We're still cutting everything. So there's a lack of precision. And I think to actually, be able to scale, we need to be, find solutions they're more like the way we build other products that we need to scale. Whether that's a car, an iPhone, whatever it is, we need to be building things, housing more like other products. And it's very difficult to do that in a factory. And this allows us to do something that is factory-like, but we can do it on site.
So has that changed the way you think about housing and construction today?
Yeah, 100%. Because it's, again, you always have, I think, the difference between experience and not having experience is, you can have a plan. And we see that a lot these days where people, they watch something on TikTok or they YouTube and they and there's this sort of, it's great because it does make us a lot more willing to try something, which I think is, we sorely need that, back in America again, where people are willing to try something. Having watched something is not the same as having done it a lot of times. That's like having the plan, and experience comes when things don't go to plan. That's where all the things, I'm thinking of, the developments we're doing now, we're doing small scale residential developments because that's what's, Austin's, at the cutting edge of that these days. And yeah, we have a plan because the machine is an important part of us going back and creating house kits. So again, that's looking historically. I think that was what I was going to say is that, I grew up with the Sears catalog. It's how we picked out our Christmas presents when I was a little kid, and we had, Sears had kit houses, back in the early 1900s, and they sold, 50,000 of them between them and other suppliers. And that was a great way to do that. That worked really well up until the Depression, the war, all that. So when you combine that with IKEA, you combine that with Amazon and different, a lot of things have changed. So you go, okay, well, this is a way to actually make it, a lot easier for people to get on the property ladder. So, and, that was what was unique about one of the things I was drawn to this, the tiny house community when we started to dabble in that a little bit was it really, resembled like Dubai was a frontier market. It wasn't even an emerging market until I was halfway through my stint there. And, emerging markets have a lot of great things. There's an openness and a willingness to try new things. And that's kind of what drew me to that tiny house thing, because it was a bunch of people who realized that housing wasn't working for them. And they kind of went, well, how do we hack this? What do we do that can, how do we do something that will work for us that isn't going to get, shut down, or, someone's going to make me, throw it away or whatever. So I like that emerging marketness of the tiny house community. And that was, we've out of those, the hundreds of tiny houses we did, half of those go to people that are DIYers and half go to builders who are either building them for sale or for a customer. So,
Okay.
and there were times we could drop off that framing package on a Friday. We'd get a picture on a Monday, somebody who's never really picked up a tool, and they've got it done. And they're, because and they're so excited. They have this ownership and this pride in that they built their own house. And again, if you ask a room full of people, not a lot of people are going to raise their hand to say, yeah, I built my own house. So
Absolutely.
the openness and the willingness to kind of get in there and do it, and the benefits that came out of that, I was like, well, that's special. So, that piece, and then you pull in these other things over time that you kind of go, okay, well, maybe this is going to be an interesting way to solve that. And that changes as now, here in Austin, they passed some legislation. So we're now, sort of, again, adopting or, evolving, some of the things that we were doing with tiny homes and ADUs, and now doing that for, we'd always focused, where we wanted to be is 1,500 square feet and under, because that's the things, if you call a builder to build, he's going to say, I'm not interested. It's very difficult to make enough money on a project that size for a builder. And with, the shortage of houses, they're going to focus on what makes them the most money. I mean, that's what, that is
Right.
what's supposed to happen in our economy. It's just the invisible hand is supposed to bring other people in to, if there's a shortage, it's supposed to get, we're supposed to be solving that, but we're not, because of things, some of the labor shortage is a big one. So, so yeah, definitely
Mark,
had a big influence.
to what you just said, what are the biggest lessons with you getting into the tiny homes and the ADUs, and which is the way of thinking? What lessons? Because it's a definitely a different concept, especially with the machine you have and the speed. And then you mentioned the pride of people, being able to put together that. But I'm sure there was some lessons on the way. Can you go into that a little bit?
The reason you get into something because it looks easy, but it's not. Obviously, if you talk to that person who framed that house, that might have been the easiest part they did. Then you still there's still real work to do. So, I've always said, I have a slightly different view of entrepreneurship than a lot of people, and I think one of the most important things you can have in business is patience and perseverance, and just a willingness to be uncomfortable and do the work. And, we saw that again, maybe that was one of the reasons I was drawn to that, that group of people, is that, I've always said it was very much hindered by land lending and laws. So, it was, you can have this great unit that you built and that you spent a lot more money probably than you thought you were going to, because these things are, they're complicated. So there's some of the best structures that get built these days, not in small part because of our framing, because it's, it's engineered for that solution. It's, And by the nature of steel, you have to do continuous insulation for thermal bridging, and you have to do these other things. You end up building this thing that is it's not like the houses that you and I are probably sitting in that were built a long time ago and that were built by a production builder or a developer, and they did an okay job. It was one of the things when you're building something for yourself, you can take the extra 5 minutes to do it right that somebody who was getting in their pickup truck on a Friday and leaving might not do. So people being willing to do the work and do it right, but actually put in that effort is an important part. I was saying the land, because you having someplace to park it. Most of the ones we did, they were done out of savings. People you can't get loans for these things because they're not attached to property. Because they're not attached to property, if you ask your city to come in and inspect it, they're going to say, well, I don't even know what that is. And when you tell them, they say, and if you mention it's on a trailer, they go, oh, great. Yeah, go down to the DMV. That's not my problem. Go, almost no tiny houses ever had an inspection. There's some third-party agencies that came around, sort of in the back half of that period. But you had things and that's one of the reasons we got into it, because that we did it sort of at scale, was because we liked the idea, we liked the people, and what was, people were investing a lot, but they weren't getting a great product because things, they were building it on a Craigslist trailer on 2x4 framing that, like they were building a shed in their backyard, and that wasn't engineered to go down the road. So, for someone to make that kind of commitment, time, money, all that, they really should have something for that. So that's we've done when we did, we've houses that have 50,000 miles on them that for traveling nurses and all, so, and we have retail units that have been, that are on their second and third where we've, repurposed them. So, doing things well, is important. And that it's a great, that's where we've broadened out the offer over just the framing, but the framing is a really important part of, of all that thinking.
So what is the misunderstanding then? I think it's obvious, but with steel framing compared to traditional wood framing, can you tell the audience, really what the difference is besides the obvious?
Well, I would say, it's exactly that. It's not the obvious. Everyone, one of our biggest hurdles when we're talking to people about the systems that we're using, the first thing is, and I was the same, I've been building things for 20 plus years. By the time as we were, we had a particular challenge. We were building this Norman Foster designed, had the three tallest towers in Abu Dhabi, had this huge retail component, this amazing souk, won all kinds of engineering awards. Well, by the time we got to where we were getting ready to put the tenants in, we didn't have enough structural capacity to actually put all the mezzanines in. There's 400 tenant spaces that we couldn't put mezzanines in. And that it's not something that we could go, bad luck. No, your 400 square foot space that you want to have, a mezzanine, and you can't put it in. We had to solve it. So we had to find something, and we did a global search for how do we find something light enough and strong enough, to put these mezzanines in, because people were showing up with red iron and the building would not support those sorts of solutions. So when people told me, when they were explaining it to me and saying it's LSF, I assumed the same as most people that are in the design and construction industry. I know what metal framing is. I've been in commercial construction for 25 years. So, you're talking to me like I don't know what it is. And this is very different to what we all know in commercial metal framing. When you're doing a commercial building, here in the States, you, instead of wood showing up, you have metal studs that show up. Now, if you're doing demising walls, in an office building, that's going to be non-graded, 25, 26 gauge metal studs that you're going to, that the framers and the drywall hangers are going to come, they're going to snip that on site and they're going to stand your walls. And it's basically, it gets about half its support from the drywall when you screw it together. It's the whole assembly. What we're using these systems, this is, structural. It can be, generally we use 20 gauge, 18 gauge, but this is roll formed, and it's sort of like the red iron and the galvanized that you're used to seeing in commercial kind of made a baby. It's much sturdier. Everything's pre-punched. Everything is cut. There's zero waste. So you get all the benefits that people are familiar with steel, because when you see steel in residential, that's normally because it's a commercial contractor that built his own house out of steel because he was willing to pay the premium. He had the relationships with the subs. And the difference with what we're doing is there's no commercial framers. Anyone can put this together. Now, it's obviously better if you have experienced teams, because really what you're getting, the big benefit is the speed. So, we can put up one of our steel framing systems in about a third of the time, or better than what you could do with wood framing. And that's a big, especially
that's amazing.
in all construction, but residential, it's certainly much, when you're talking about your carry costs on a project, pulling that time out and pulling the time out in the beginning, you can't overstate how important that is. But all that to come back and say that's not the important part. So all that, the no off gassing, the zero waste, the, being lighter, stronger. What I would say the real value is that this is digital design and manufacturing.
What does that mean?
Say that again, I guess in digital manufacturing, you have three types. You have additive, which is what 3D printing, you're adding something to it. You have subtractive, which is CNCing, whether that's a lathe for making an aluminum or metal part. And then you have formative. So we are using formative design and manufacturing. So, the way digital design works is that when that guy's when you're CNCing, when IKEA is CNCing their shelves, the designer is taking that, what they design on their computer, and they're sending that directly to the machine that's going to manufacture it. And that's what we do. We take the design that we do, or that if an architect does a design, we take that design, we then use the exact CAD files to turn that into, there's typically different languages for the CNC or the lathes or 3D printer or our machine. You convert that into the language that the machine speaks, but it comes out of the machine exactly like the architect drew it. So that digital, that transformation as a carpenter, the first thing you do on a wood framed house is you start fixing stuff, or you start checking for everything that's out so that you can work from the worst header, not the best. Otherwise, things don't line up. So you don't do any of that when you're talking about digital design and manufacturing. So yes, you get all the benefits of steel. You do get the benefit in schedule, but it's really the fact that from a design point of view, what you're building is exactly what was envisioned by the designer, and that saves a tremendous amount of time in the field.
That's amazing. Where do you see tiny homes, your industry, particularly your company? Where do you see in terms of growth it going in the next year or two?
Yeah, well, I mean, the problem that we're trying to solve is that we don't have, it was interesting, last election cycle, you finally heard people, housing sort of snuck its way in. Affordability is talked about a lot. There's a premium that gets paid, on every house that gets sold, not just new houses, but every house, because there's a shortage. And that's just the way supply and demand works in a mature market.
Right.
So, every house has a 10 to 15% premium paid because we're 4 million houses short. And that's when you're 4 million houses short, and, we've got long-term disequilibrium in the market. It's not something that, that is getting fixed so it's good that people finally started acknowledging that, it's not just a crisis, because that just means, well, we don't know how to fix a crisis, right? That's just it's just this thing. Then they started talking about it as a shortage. So then people start to go, well, how do we solve a shortage? And so, well, how do we, so we've been focusing on that shortage now for, almost a decade. It's, what we've been talking about. And okay, that tiny houses were this weird little niche that people were trying to work around that shortage. What we want to, focus on is, well, one, just that. So if you're 4 million short, and we fall about 400,000 houses further behind every year, we're still building less. So that's over 1,000 houses a day that aren't getting built. And that's why we were focusing on the small houses, the 1,500 square feet and under, because those are the ones that builders simply can't make enough money. They're not worth, you have to go through the same amount of effort to build a small house as you do a bigger house. So if you're the guy that's building it, you've got to provide for your family. You're going to lean towards and there's so much demand, you're going to build the bigger stuff. And that means for people that are either starting out or finishing up in life, your only choice is to buy a used house or to buy a 2,500 square foot house when you really only need a starter home. Might be you on your own, might be you and your wife, or you might be on the other end and you're downsizing, the kids are out. You don't need that big house, but that's what's out there and available. So what we very much want to do is, one, We want to, take those designs, go find great designs, not just because one of the things that in my, working out and starting in residential out in California was, one of the things that struck me right away was that, yeah, we worked on these beautiful projects, but it was pretty much for the rich and famous. They got great design. The stuff that, I lived in some nice, zip codes, but they're still production homes. They're still there's still someone else's idea of, I'll throw some nice finishes on this house and I can sell it for more money. Not that I'm going to organize, the house or design it in a way that is actually compelling and that's intentional. So we get an opportunity to go out there, find great designs and take those designs and turn them from a house project into a product. And there's a lot that goes into that to turn that into, something that is, you can have different configurations, you can have different levels of finish, you can have it, and we can work with those designers so they maintain the authorship of that home. And we make it so that it's a lot easier, whether it is for a builder or developer, or it's for somebody who's building their own home. We can tell them, here's the whole package and that's where the steel is a big part of that, being able to go, okay, well, we can give you everything that fits exactly into that home, just like Sears did 100 years ago. So we can say, yeah, these are, and you can buy it in different levels, have it delivered when you need it. Because ultimately, as much as we're talking about the shortage, yes, we're short homes, but we're short homes because we're short people that are building them. So, to solve that 1,000 a day house, that means houses. That means we need 26,000 new builders in the market to actually just the shortfall, not to touch the 4 million. So that's 26,000. So if we can help people become builders, like here in Austin, we've got the home initiative now allows you to put 3 houses on one lot that used to have a single family residential unit. We're doing a couple of those now, and we're doing those to basically come up with, what I call citizen developer program so we can help people, because that math has changed everything. Because now you can, in Austin, and we're seeing this now in other parts of the country where people are looking and going, that's a pretty good program. And, somebody coming in, whether they're, a retired veteran, whether they're a couple that was going to build a vacation home and then Airbnb it, whether somebody who didn't want to go traditional college route anymore, going, I don't know what with AI, I don't know what to do, but they can build 3 houses and sell 2, and they can basically be in, an $800,000 home for about a $200,000 mortgage off the back of, doing that work.
Right.
So if we can help kind of demystify that process and use a kit home or a package of kit homes, because it's 3 houses on a lot, or 4 houses, that if we can make that simpler for people, then we can be allowing more houses to be built, but we can also be bringing more people in that go, well, I can do that. And I'll do that. If I did that once a year, instead of going, a traditional college career, I could have a 10 house portfolio, in a dozen years, instead of, a degree and a lot of debt and a career debt. So there's, we see, like anything with, if you're really looking at it from a different direction, there's a lot of opportunities that reveal themselves.
Speaking of that, as AI, automation, and digital manufacture become more common, how do you see technology changing the future of construction and housing?
I think that you see a lot of AI around construction. And I think that's the easiest examples of, when people are concerned, and everyone's kind of, obviously people like in construction, like the AI conversation in a sense, because it says, well, they, just like in COVID, if you were an essential worker, well, if you're on the tools, you're not really at risk of AI taking your job, so at least, not in the next few years now, and it's going to be a lot harder for robots to be on construction sites. So I think that's not really something that's talked about a lot for a long time. What we see now is we see AI around the industry, not really in the industry. I think there's going to be more. I mean, obviously with the Anthropic and Blackstone sort of investing in and saying the first market that they want to actually go after is real estate. That's a little, I don't know, could be, well, we're just in my other business in Vindico, we've done some technology stuff and we're in the process of piloting. We just had our big convention last month in Vegas, and we're piloting using AI to do design review, because that's typically what we do, between landlords and tenants. We write the criteria and we review the drawings and then manage the construction inside of shopping centers. So we're using AI to read the drawings and to kind of provide the comments, that we would normally do. And it's not perfect, but it is, I think, one of the things that it also doesn't have a bad day. So where we're getting 80 to 90% of the comments that a human would get, we're getting most of those right. We're not getting everything, but we're getting most of their comments, but we're also getting another 30 or 40% more comments because the AI doesn't miss stuff. And that's, AI loves a single truth. That's where we're fortunate because we've done, over 10,000 stores, that's a big data set
Right.
for us to go in, to teach it. So, I see AI, finding ways for AI to be in construction instead of just around it. I think that's more challenging. So obviously, we use it a lot. We use it for estimating. We use it for obviously, content. There's, I think everyone's redoing their websites. There's a lot of great stuff. But I think that once you I guess a weird analogy I make is that to me it's like steroids. Like we were all bodybuilders back in the '80s, back in my day, and that was and everyone thought if you had the shot, you were automatically gonna look like Arnold, and that they didn't. The 3 hours of gym every day and the amount of work that had to happen, and that's. I think that people that don't use AI a lot think that it's gonna write my report for me. It's gonna do this. And it's only until you actually use it in anger and you really are trying to get it to do, to bend to your will and you actually have a place that you're going, and you realize the real benefit is that, it's going to do 80% of the grunt work, but the 20% that you can add to that. I did a project a year and a bit ago for a big project in Saudi. That was a retail strategy. And it's the best work that I've ever done. I did it almost, not completely by myself. I still had the support of my team, but I was able to, because for me, I have a lot of clutter in my head, and AI doesn't care that it takes me a while to get to the point. It doesn't, it'll, bears with me. It'll combine, if I have different, disparate thoughts that are all kind of getting somewhere, it can pull all that together. So I think that when you're really, and if you are, an expert in something, then because you have to top and tail it. You have to look at what it's creating. You have to put the right, a lot of times some of the, and really, I guess once I've got 3.5 years into my, I was using ChatGPT mostly, but once you have that, I can really put in very little information now that is just the kernel of wisdom maybe, and because it has all that. And it's, so I can create, it's a lot faster, but I'm not, it's my content. It's not just, it's not what ChatGPT thinks the retail strategy be for, for organized retail in a new market like Saudi.
Because it knows you, you put in all your information, so it has and learns.
Yeah, and actually in the business, it makes it really easy for me to get consistency across, the business because I can, I can make that available to other people. And I think, one of the things for young people or people starting out in whatever industry in is that they need to, it's the most important question I would ask somebody now if I was hiring is, how AI literate are you? I want to know that if I'm hiring you, I'm getting the benefit of all the work that you've done for other people, not that, we don't all start from scratch, which is, bringing that back to, to a residential project or whether a shopping center, that's what we've seen, in my career. Every time we start a new, I've worked on some of the biggest projects, in the world and shopping centers and airports. And there's this really annoying part at the beginning where everything starts over. And, you're like things like setting up filing systems and how we're going to, and it's like everyone, you bring together the best in the world at something, and then and they all have mature systems, and then you put all that into a brand new sort of, but even just, that filing system, whatever it is. So we create all this dysfunction every time we start one of those projects so being able to codify things and kind of trying to get to that, that one truth. And that's where I think AI will help a lot to kind of, just get rid of the inefficiencies that I don't know. I guess it was job security back in the day, but once you've been doing it a long time, I'm less concerned about the job security. I just really like to get things done. So
Right. And the efficiency and like you say, it doesn't have a bad day. 24/7. It
yep,
shows up.
it's very patient with
Yeah.
me.
Just
Well,
patience
my,
and
my wife is tired of hearing about my.
consistency, and as they say, it learns, it's faster, but like anything, garbage in, garbage out. If you give it the wrong information, it's going to give you the wrong information out. Mark, this was a really great conversation. Um, where can they reach you at Volstrukt?
Volstrukt.com. I'm obviously there, socials as well on, Instagram and I guess a little bit of Facebook. But
Okay.
yeah, Volstrukt.com is the best place to reach out. The other business is Vindico retail.com. So, but yeah, Volstrukt, if you keep an eye on this, should be an interesting back half of the year. So there's a lot happening in the space. And there's a lot happening here in Austin.
Oh, really? Before we go, tell us a little bit about that. What's going on?
Well, it's just, I mean, with this the home initiative, and with that's where Austin was fortunate, because we benefited from everything that was happening out with ADUs in the West Coast, and you saw a lot of things in that regard that were changing. So there's a lot here in town. I mean, obviously, the this year at Vegas, it was the first time where they had sort of the prop tech, the AI component that was there. So you had a lot of, I think that there's a lot of interest. There's maybe more than that, just people trying to figure it out. I think it's well timed. I think that when I have a lot of meetings these days where I've got a couple of kids in the business, and when you sit across from someone who's the same age as you, and their son or daughter is running that business, well, the person that is my age, about to turn 62, is you know maybe not as willing to learn or to change, or they're kind of going, but if the young person's going to take over that business, they're very much going, okay, well, we're not doing it the way you did it, Dad. We're going to go and we're going to, so they're a lot more open to kind of, that a more entrepreneurial approach to how we're going to solve these problems. What are these pieces that we can pull in to find the efficiencies? So those are businesses. You're always happy to do the work, but it is exciting to find people that are really looking to. We're fortunate because we do some weird stuff. We're doing some really cool tree houses. We've done all kinds of different projects, and so a lot of times when people are looking
Yeah.
to do something different, they'll find us. So we get to be included in some different conversations, because that's one of the things about just going back to the machine a little bit, was that the machine will eat complexity for breakfast. So, we're hoping to do more stuff out in California around the fires. They lost 11,000 homes out there. And,
Yeah.
we're looking to get out there at some point. We've always get, natural disasters. People, look at steel a lot. That's what the government's been trying to move people to steel for a long time. But it was always prohibitively expensive. So, but when you look at LA and some of those homes out there, yeah, there are very big, complex homes, and if you're the framer, hanging out at 40 feet in the air and doing very steep roofs and all these really complicated structures, that's not a lot of fun, But the machine doesn't care, it doesn't. There's no premium for complexity, so that's where a lot of times, I think every new technology has some constraints and some opportunities. And that's where, we're excited to kind of work through sort of what those opportunities are.
Mark, great stuff. This is a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your insight into the housing innovation, steel framing, attainable housing, and the role technology is playing in changing how we build. For anyone listening who wants to learn more about Marc and Volstrukt, we'll make sure to include the information. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this episode with anyone passionate about innovation, leadership, and the future of intelligent automation. I'm Ed Moran, and as always, stay visionary.